I'm Lisa Shea, and I'm here with 4 talented, amazing horror authors, and we're going to talk about how environment plays a critical role in horror stories. So welcome, everybody.
Hello.
We'll start with Trisha this time. Trisha, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Trisha J. Wooldridge. I also write for children under TJ Wooldridge. I've 3 children's novels that I've written, and I'm in the Don't Turn Out the Lights tribute to Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which just came out on September 1st. I've got a creepy story called The Skelly Horse in that. I also am in a bunch of other anthologies, magazines with my short fiction. And I'm currently editing the New England Horror Writers' most recent anthology, Wicked Women, which is coming out in October.
Great. Right, Jason?
I'm Jason Parent. I'm the writer of science fiction, horror, and thriller novels, novellas, short stories. About 8 novels out there, 2 more on the way. After that, maybe I'm done. We'll see.
Oh. Right, Andrew?
I am Andrew Boylan. I write screenplays and a novel, and I also ghostwrite. But I write psychological horror and thrillers, psychological thrillers.
And Curtis?
My name is Curtis. I'm Lawson. I write mostly supernatural horror and weird fiction. I like saying weird fiction because I'm pretentious. And I have several novels published, including Blackheart Boys Choir and It's a Bad, 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 Bad World, and a few short story collections, including my brand new one, Devil's Night.
Which was the one I was going to mention, because that's the perfect segue. So tell us how you got the environment, because that's such a key part of Devil's Night.
Well, the book came about because so S.T. Joshi had read Blackheart Boys Choir before I had published it, and he put me in touch with Joe Morey at Weird House Press. And Joe he founded Dark Regions, but his son runs it now, and he started Weird House Press. And he read Boys Choir, and he said, this is a wonderful book, and it's really well written, and I absolutely can't sell it. So, so why don't you write me something else? So I pitched him a few ideas. He wanted the collection, so I pitched him an idea for a collection of intertwined stories that all took place on a single Devil's Night in Detroit in 1987, and that's the setting is a huge part of it, obviously. And for anybody who doesn't know, Devil's Night. For a long time in Detroit, on the night before Halloween, people would just like set the whole city on fire, and it was pretty wild. It's probably most famous from The Crow. I didn't even think it was a real thing for the long time. I thought it was made up for The Crow, and then I realized that it actually happened for decades there, and that always intrigued me. So the opportunity to explore that setting and I guess the psychological and socioeconomic factors that go into something like that, coupled with the idea of being able to explore several different types of horror stories that were still connected, was really appealing to me. And they're all kind of drawn together, not just by the location and the time, but also kind of some loose themes. And, there's this whole theme of fire throughout the whole thing because that's intrinsic to it. But it took a lot of research to understand Detroit in 1987 and what was going on there, why these things happened. And it's not as cut and dry as you might think. If you watch The Crow or something, you think, oh, well, everybody's just going out and it's anarchy and it's like the Purge and they're burning everything down. Like a lot of those fires were started by like mothers and fathers because they were burning down crack houses and gang dens and things like that. So a lot of it was people trying to, take back parts of their city where the government was failing them and things like that. And a lot of it was just general, like arson and things like that. But it was definitely the most, I guess, setting. The piece I've done where the setting was the most intrinsic, and it had to every piece in the story had to really be tied to the time and the place for it to function right.
Mhm.
And I think I was inspired a lot of that also by something like Sin City, where Sin City is this other piece of fiction where the city itself is this setting, and so I looked to pieces like Sin City, or even like It, where Derry is like a character. Not that my book's really anything like that, but those are the kind of pieces of fiction I sought to emulate, while approaching the idea of the setting as a really intrinsic part of the story.
Right, right. So Andrew, you similarly in Sacrifice, which I have here, it's available on Amazon. The setting there is super intrinsic to the whole way the story unfolds, and you can really feel it as another character almost.
Yeah, well, I know that for me, well, New Mexico and that setting was natural to that, given that it was based on a cult from that started 200 years ago there. But I also am just drawn in general to unforgiving settings, like unforgiving landscapes, like the desert, being one. I think it creates a natural conflict where if you don't have a conflict at the moment, the setting can be contrary to the character. I mean, I think growing up in New England, before I moved out west, I mean, the ocean, I said a lot of things on the ocean. I think the ocean is a very antagonistic character in perfect setting for stories. And then I know that one of my films, Home Sweet Home, the first one, I had to think about setting in a very different way, because I came up with the idea, but the movie itself was approached to me because they had a setting before we wrote the script that it had to be based on. So I had to think about what would this setting, this house, and the environment around the house do to pit against the character, and be a natural conflict. So those are some of the ways that I feel setting has played a huge role in much of what I've written.
Well, and you lived in New Mexico for many years, so you were able to really bring it to life with all those details that really shine.
Yeah, so I definitely, it's nice of you to say that it did. I always hope it works, but but yeah, I spent 15 years there and I loved it. I mean, I feel like that was where I was always meant to be, was in the desert. So I loved the crags and the creosote and the brush and all, and just the emptiness. I just feel like there's like a constant sense of foreboding and loneliness that I really keyed into, and I tried to make that play as much as I could, in the rugged San Ingray de Christi Mountains, which means the blood of Christ, because that's where they crucified everybody in the 200 years ago. So it's I think about, so I definitely think that those things played a big role. Having lived there, lived in landscapes, definitely help. And rewriting helps, because they all were terrible when they started.
No,
No, I'm
they're
just kidding.
just less brilliant.
Can I ask Andrew something?
Yeah,
sure.
So you mentioned, also the ocean being important and being this kind of antagonistic force. And I know you surf. So how much has that played into kind of your understand, or how you portray the ocean when you write about any sort of ocean theme thing? Because I know it affects me.
Yeah, no, I think that the ocean has always been infected me. It was something that I explored. I wrote an unpublished novel years ago about a woman who all she wanted to ever do was have a house on the ocean, and so it was like kind of moving towards that and marrying a lobsterman. But I am right now, my novel that's coming out in the end of October, actually deals with surfing, deals with the ocean, and I have to say that it took me a while to get back into the mode of like really trying to like write about water and surfing, and trying to find a way to describe that didn't become sort of cliche and Zen or Point Break, which is one of my favorite movies. I didn't want to fall
I
back.
love Point.
Just
Yeah,
have a whole bunch of Bodhiisms, but find like a new angle to kind of figure out how to deal with the beach, and how you describe, especially the New England beach, which I think is kind of,
Oh, it's so different.
it's so different. Like I can see a tropical beach, and I love Alex Garland's book, The Beach, and but New England's beach and New England, like the gray sea is very moody here, much like Ireland, Dublin, the dirty Dublin Sea.
I just wrote a short story called Black Eyes Beneath Gray Waves, and it's a Lovecraftian surf story. And it was, the whole thing was trying to capture that New England kind of coastline, that there's a different kind of experience surfing in New England in February than like surfing in Florida or California or Puerto Rico or something.
Yeah.
So I just was curious how that affected you. And also I feel like you have a different understanding of the ocean after it's kicked your ass than if you're just watching it from the shore.
Right. Yeah. When you don't know which way is up, it changes.
Yeah.
Right. Trisha, how about in your stories?
Yes, setting has always been a really big thing, and I've also used the New England Ocean in a couple of stories. Actually, one story, not out yet, it's currently on submission, is based on Scusset Beach on the way to the Cape, in the Cape. And you've got these little glowy plankton that come out in, I had not expected that. And then we went to go look at them and we're drunk, and then the ocean knocked a bunch of us underwater. It was kind of scary. So that, and just the alienness of being out, and it was a private beach, so there wasn't anyone else out there. And it's also extremely rocky. So if you're going down into the ocean, you're pretty much hurting your feet unless you've, got something on. So yeah, there's a lot there. I also do a lot with cities. So I grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which was, when I was growing up, slightly bigger than Worcester. So it was went between the second and third largest city in all of New England. So very, very urban. And there's a lot of violence and a lot of poverty there. I didn't realize that the rest of New England wasn't like that. So I have a lot of my stories about people dealing with poverty, people dealing with bullying in that urban setting. There's a lot of horror that goes into a setting where, there's so much corruption when you've got a fair amount of poverty. We've had Boston police like trying to buy out the police, and who was taking care of who, definitely a lot of mob connections. My dad and I worked at the newspaper, which was in what was called one of the not good sections of the city, and what it's like traveling there every day for a third shift job. And all of those are like everyday horror that you kind of grow up with. And when I went to other parts of New England, the fact that people didn't lock their car doors all the time or didn't know to always check the back seat was an interesting thing, because it's a everyday horror that you live with. So things like that always also work into my stories. And then I've also actually set a few stories and novels in Scotland, and I went over to Scotland actually to do research on stories and hiking in the areas. I went to Traquair House, which is the oldest lived in castle/mansion in Scotland. And I interviewed the family that lived there and still had it as a historical place and a bed and breakfast. But it's this amazing castle that has a hedge maze in the back. So that was more research, because I didn't grow up and living in that situation, but taking the time to research what it's like to live in the area, what it's like to have a historical house, to know that your house was like where Mary Queen of Scots hid during the Jacobite uprising, things like that. That was really fascinating. So setting and all of that contributes to the feel, to character motivation. Like, your characters are products of where they live, where they grow up, and what they're used to. So for me, setting as much as being almost an antagonist, like what Andrew was saying, because again, with New England Ocean, with the, you know, but it's also something that builds your characters, and it's in your character's DNA, what they grew up in, and having that correct means a lot for the story.
What about you, Jason?
Like Trish, a lot of my thrillers take place in Fall River. It's Fall River, where I'm from. So,
I'll put subtitles down for people.
Fall River.
Far Eve.
Yeah, that's where I grew up. I mean, but it's not really an important setting for me. It's just what I know. It could easily have been Worcester. It could have been Springfield. It could have been New Bedford. For those books, I guess I've used setting as a character, and Lay Feed. It was a one night in a woods horror survival novel. The woods was critical to that. In this book, I could get a cheap. What's that? Plug. That's a plug. I don't know if you guys got that joke. Basically, this November I have a book coming out that takes place in the mountain deserty region, kind of like the Grand Canyon outside of Las Vegas from Crystal Lake. But where I've used it the most was for misdirection, actually. I had a character that was a soldier in Afghanistan, and the story is called Dia de los Muertos because it takes place on the Day of the Dead in Mexico, obviously. So there's two types of stories that people immediately think of, the Day of the Dead setting and the flashbacks to the Afghanistan setting. It's not a PTSD story, and it's got nothing to do with anything Day of the Dead, except it ties in at the end. You have to read it. There's a little nod to all horror fans. I think they would like the ending of that. It's in Bad Apples too, but basically, yeah, you're going to think it's one kind of story or another kind of story, and you're going to be completely wrong because of those settings.
I think in Werewolves Run, the setting was fairly important.
Oh yeah, well, that's a
partially because the time being part of the setting too.
A classic kind of werewolf tale, but also a modern werewolf tale if you think about it. But yeah, it takes place in Bavaria and in a real town in the real woods that I researched, but obviously I've never been there. But so it's got that classic kind of werewolf setting, but I wouldn't consider it. I would consider it a contemporary horror novel, despite that.
Mm-hmm. So, having lived in Fall River, you're able to bring all sorts of little details in there that other Fall Riverians would appreciate.
Yeah. JJ's didn't make it in yet. Only like one person out there is going to know what that means. It's a hot dog place. Don't worry about it. Yeah, my two favorite sub-shops haven't made it in yet, but all the streets I use are actual streets. So if there's an abandoned mill, it's an actual abandoned mill that I drive by on my way to the gym or something. So, I mean, every place in it is real and authentic. So the setting is, it makes it easier for me to tell the story I want to tell because I don't have to put as much thought into the setting. I can describe it with the perfect picture of what I've seen already, rather than have to create that picture in my mind.
Well, and I think it's a lot of fun for readers. I mean, I lived in Providence for 2 years. I'm pointing like it's in that direction. It's actually in that direction. But I love going down there, like, and reading Lovecraft stories and saying, oh, look, this is the actual house that he was writing about. And if you look out that window, you can actually see, Federal Hill and that sort of stuff. So
I did the whole tour of the Lovecraft loop in Providence to see all those sites. And it was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And I was like 5 minutes away. And did he invite me or come over? I just busted out of here.
Then we have to quarantine for 2 weeks.
That's a good point.
I don't even know if I was supposed to be there.
No,
I could have got arrested.
But I think that is fun for local people and for travelers too, to be able to go somewhere and say, oh, look, that's the actual sub shop they were talking about, or the actual beach where the murder happened, or whatever other kinds of details. But
Yeah.
I think it does also help that you can bring it in general to very vivid life, because you know what the scents are like on the ocean, and you know what the light looks like when it's coming in the morning, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's pragmatic too. Like my Bad World books are all set like in or around Boston and like Salem and such, just because it's like, geez, this is what I know. It's where I grew up, where I live. So I think there's a pragmatism to writing about places you're intimately familiar with. And you
And
do
then,
get that kind of cool, like if you're a local, you're like, oh, well, that's the Salem Willows. I go there during the summer kind of thing,
yep.
Yeah. What do you think about when you read something where they said it very specifically in a place and then they get it all wrong?
Oh, I hate it.
I read a
I
really
hate it.
popular novel this summer, and it was set in Newburyport, and I was like, none of this kind of seems like Newbury. None of this matches.
My wife just read a book that took place in Salem, and she's like, no, this is all wrong.
I might get some booze for this, but I've been watching Lovecraft Country, and why does we've all lived, I lived in Massachusetts, okay? So Arnhem, Massachusetts. Why is the sheriff talking with a southern accent? No. People, I stopped watching after the second episode. People have talked me into going into 3. So, but yeah, that bothers me.
Trisha, you're muted.
Sorry, I was trying to keep it. So yeah, oh my God, Scott and I were like, but that makes no sense if they're gonna cross a bridge back into Worcester County. There's nowhere like that in Massachusetts. That just makes no sense. And they keep pointing to different parts on the map. I'm like, wait a minute, wait, what? How are you there and then going south to go to Worcester County? So yeah, no,
I haven't
was
watched it.
so frustrated with that part of Lovecraft County as well. I love the series otherwise, but oh my God, yeah.
I haven't watched it, but that would infuriate me, just because I know that the guy who runs hplovecraft.com, he's like a Lovecraft geography historian, and there's like very good maps of like where these places fit into real world Massachusetts. So if they got that stuff wrong, that would really bother me.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't watch it. If I were you.
No, I've been holding off because you guys, I know I'm on the gentler side of all of this, but I've heard enough people say that it's really good and it's not that gory, so I'm going to give it a shot. But that I will be screaming at the TV if that sort of stuff is happening.
I just don't want to pay for HBO.
Well, you get a 30-day free trial and then you just turn it
Yeah,
off.
that's what I'm gonna wait till it's all done, and then I'll do that.
Well, maybe next time you're in Providence, you can just stay low, and I'll
We could
let
have
you
a
watch
watch
it for
party.
free.
Wait, so we could like go tour all the Lovecraft sites, and then we could go eat on Federal Hill, and then we'll have a Lovecraft watch party.
Jason will feed us.
Oh, excellent.
Well, I mean, Curtis is Salem. I mean, you don't get much more horror related than that.
That's true. You guys want to cram into my 700 square foot condo? Come on over.
We'll just go to a different place each week for a different episode. All right, so then we have Jason writing about the Arctic, or was it the Antarctic?
Siberia. But,
Siberia, oh sorry, one of those cold places.
Oh yeah, the Apocalypse Strain just came out in August. It takes place in the Siberian tundra, and I mean that setting I stole from an actual news article where we are actually pulling ancient Pandora viruses out of the Siberian tundra and studying them.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Things that could do anything to us that we don't know what. So, yeah, it's kind of thing, kind of an homage to The Thing, my favorite movie of all time. So, it's a love letter to that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's the setting's taken from real life. So, yeah, if people want to call me on it, hey man, just read the news. Call woman.
But you did not fly to Siberia.
I'm sorry?
But you did not fly to Siberia.
No, I did not. You know, like everything, you should do your research. But I mean, there's not much different ways to describe snow. I don't think it looks different than it does up here in New England. It might. If I blew that, I blew that. think it's
I wonder
fine.
though if the smell of winter is different there or something like that. Those are the things I imagine would be, might be details.
Well,
Mm.
I imagine it's harder to find people who live in Siberia to ask those questions too. Like I was able to send my Devil's Night stuff to a bunch of people from Detroit and be like, tell me if I messed anything up. It's harder with Siberia, I guess.
I'll reconsider it when my foreign translation rights come in for
Yeah.
But till then, I think I'm all right.
Did you use like Google satellite like shots to like think about that book though? Like, or like what was your research into a setting that you hadn't been to? I'm very curious.
More into the actual dig. So in newspaper articles, they're describing the setting in those articles, and I'm learning about what they're actually doing at the same time. So, I mean, they had like this shows up in the book a little bit. They had like space mission practice out there too at the same time while people were doing these weird things, yeah, I mean, it was contemporary when I was writing it, so it wasn't hard to research because the research was coming in every day.
Yeah. Well, because it felt very genuine, like it felt lived in.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I think Jason and I have both done the Google Maps kind of research though for the Vatican, because we were both writing about the Vatican.
We were supposed to compare notes, but I think he blew me off on that too.
No, we had the same notes. Remember? We watched the same documentaries. And they, yeah, that was interesting because I had to figure out how somebody would like parkour across Vatican City. So Google Maps was a huge friend of mine for that.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure there's a YouTube video of someone doing parkour through the Vatican City.
Probably.
I would not doubt that.
Yeah, my research was on what the guards were wearing. I think we were talking about that.
Yeah, we talked about all that, and how there were the Swiss Guard, and then there's the actual more policey guys.
Not really a halberd.
Right.
Yeah, but I think I only started the book, and most of my research for that book was actually Venice, but I started the book in Rome and the Vatican.
So Trisha, you said you actually went to Scotland. Was it specifically for the purpose of writing that story?
It was a combination. So I actually did a lot of similar to Jason and Curtis, a lot of Google mapping beforehand, because I needed to know how long it took to get from where my characters lived to Edinburgh, to Glasgow, and any other places. So I actually did Google Maps, all that, driving time, and all of that. I also I have a long list of Scottish bloggers that I follow. And so based on all of that research, so my husband occasionally works overseas. And so it was the year he was gone for most of the year. And so we planned our vacations to be overseas, where we would meet between where he was and I was. And one of those was we both wanted to go to Scotland. So part of the trip was going to Islay so that we could have lots of scotch. I have a story that I'm actually plotting that is going to eventually take place in Islay. It was amazing. I love that place. But then the other part of the vacation was where I had specifically mapped out what I needed to know for my story. So I planned all the B&Bs. I planned to stay at Traquair House. I planned hikes to where I wanted the ruins to be. There were actual ruins there. It was awesome. So it was, and so because I got a lot of research out of it, I got to, include that on my taxes, but I also got a whole lot of details I wouldn't have gotten. Like, for example, that's a huge bird nesting site. There's 18, 19 different species of birds, some of them endangered, that have nests there in June, which is where I went. So we ran into a bunch of bird photographers, and I just got to add that little detail, and what it smells like to be by a cliff that's literally covered with birds and nests and poop. It's a very unique scent, and that gets carried into the town if the winds are right. And you're like, what is that? And they also still have random plague pools just there with little plaques that says it's a plague pool. So those were like great little details that I got to put in, that I wouldn't have known otherwise, that I couldn't have gotten from like Google Maps, because they're just things that no one thinks to talk about because they're so used to it.
Yeah.
And then hiking, and how much sheep poop you have to avoid while hiking anywhere, because everything that's like public hiking land is all sheep grazing land. So adding in the details about the sheer amount of sheep poop that you need to be aware of was like fun details that I enjoyed putting in.
Have you guys ever gone somewhere and then the details of it were just so cool that you decided you had to write a story or a scene or something that included that?
All the time. I mean, I always, if I go anywhere interesting, I always like take notes about anything that sticks out to me and try to put it into a story someplace. Whether I actually use that real place or just an aspect of it that I found interesting. But that's something I do constantly.
Actually, probably the reverse. I go to, I start researching a place and writing about it, and it makes me want to go to that place. So I go after I've already done the work.
You're like, oh, this isn't as cool as I thought.
Yeah, well, I don't mention that part.
Andrew?
Yeah, I have a couple. Yeah, there's a couple places I that show up repeatedly because I just liked them so much. I after college, when I backpacked through Europe, I fell in love with Trieste, Italy. So that keeps showing up. That shows up in my new one, and a big part of the actual book that my new book was originally a part of. It was supposed to be just a chapter, and it became a novel. So I tore it out and decided to go with that and fix the other one later. But I do also what Curtis does. Like, I don't know where things are going to go, but I always like end up jotting down notes about places that while I'm there, and then I just have notebooks full of them that I like return to if it suits the thing, or if I just decide like, oh wow, that was that city in Maine or that little town was really cool. There was a town in Arizona that was built into the side of a mountain, and everything kind of hung off the side. So I use that in a short story.
Cool. Have you guys ever read about somewhere and it seems so interesting that you then planned a trip to go see it?
Well, Jason just said he did.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote about Venice, and then I went to Venice. And
Go on.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Most of my, because my son just turned 12, so most of my trips, if we go anywhere, is like somewhere like a family vacation. So I don't really get to go to many of the locations that I'd really like to in that regard. But that's a in 6 years plan kind of thing.
I don't know. Santa's Village is Storyland. A good inspiration for horror stories.
I did just write a horror story about Disney that's going to be published in November. So
sometimes I try to pick places that are 2 to 3 hours away from my home, and that way I can tell my wife, "Oh, I've got to go here to look at it," so I can like write about it, so I can get escape for the day.
Trisha, have you gone up on any literary trips?
Outside of Scotland, trying to think what order I went to places, because it kind of blurs together. I guess honestly, I could say Scotland's the only one that I actually specifically to for literary purposes. Although when I was in college, I went to Madrid and I went to the Vatican, both of which I had already read stories about, but I'm like, hey, college can pay for this. So I did a lot in there. I went to the Alhambra, because I had read Tales from the Alhambra, which is a bunch of ghost stories and fairy tales based on the Alhambra in Spain. I'm trying to think if there's, oh, House on the Rock. I had, when I was in Wisconsin, if anyone's read American Gods, House on the Rock is an actual place. It's super kitschy. It's amazing. I swear the actual descendants are trickster gods. But a friend of mine, when I went to go visit her in Wisconsin, took me there. And that was based on having read American Gods. And I haven't yet written a story there just because I can't even, excuse me, there's just so much that I'd want to go back and study that. And then I also went to the Circus Museum, the Ringling Brothers Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin, because I was working on a story, at least I had the inklings of it in my head, for Circus Under the Bed, which I have out to agents with fingers crossed. But that one was a good one. But I also happened to be going out to Wisconsin for a convention. So I do a lot of like piling up of stuff. So if I'm already going somewhere for a conference or convention, I look up what else can I do in the area that I can use for research or that I want to know.
An efficient way to do it. Are there any horror stories you guys have read where there was a scene and the place it was at really made a big difference to how the scene played out?
I mean, I'm sure there are tons. I can't think of like a particular scene necessarily, but
Or
I guess
the whole
stories.
story.
I guess stories where it, where it took place. One of my favorite stories is the case of Charles Dexter Ward by dog.
Sorry.
Somebody's just listening to the audio and is like, why is he talking about a dog? So Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft is one of my favorite stories of all time. And, that's very Providence centric. And to the point, to almost a flawed point where there's like 3 pages where he's just going on and on about street after street in Providence. But that, gave me a strong, very strong imagery of Providence at the time, and kind of made me want to go see these places, as did a lot of other Lovecraft stuff. But when Trisha was talking about American Gods, that's another story. There's so many settings in there that I think really made the story pop so much more and brought the story so much more to life. Because the settings for the different parts, they worked so well, and it was this kind of like road trip through America, and it worked really fantastically in that book. The multiple settings in America as an overall setting, or even at the end when he's in Europe and the difference between his experience in Europe and the US. Those two definitely immediately come to mind. And It is another one where the setting is so much a character, and it's so much a part of the story. One of my favorite aspects of it is the stuff, just the lore of Derry. And I thought that was very well done to the point where Pennywise is almost this manifestation of Derry itself. Like they're almost the same. You can't really separate the two. So those would be the ones that stick out in my mind.
For me, there's a book that I keep thinking about by Nathan Ballingrud. If I'm saying it right. He wrote a book called Wounds, but in there's a novella called The Butcher's Table. And it's about a ship that goes to, essentially, they have a map to hell. And I think about that setting a lot in the sense that it doesn't exist. And he found a way to so viscerally create it that it still lingers with me as though I've been to this place. And I think about that story like once a week at least. And just how he, like, I can't think of somebody who's recently that I've read that took something that doesn't exist and made it such a tangible locale.
Jeffrey Thomas, he has a Punktown series where, he created this whole like sci-fi horror world. And he did a fantastic job of making that real. Over the course of years, it's a lot of short stories. But that, I think that when you can take something that unreal and make it tangible like that, like you said, like Nathan did, it takes a lot of talent.
Mhm. Yeah. Jason?
Yeah, I'd say similarly, Philip K. Dick has done a lot of what Curtis was just describing with, like, do I'm not going to get the name right. What became Blade Runner? Do Electric Sheep? What?
The
No?
androids dream of electric sheep.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and several of his books. I mean, there's that weird one. Never mind. I'm not going to try this one either. But they're just so weird and abstract and creative that they're wonderful. But I like Andrew's example of hell for mine because I actually saw the movie first, then read the book, What Dreams May Come. I thought was the most picturesque cinematographic, am I getting that one right? Setting in film that made me want to read the book, and even there was better. So.
Yeah, I've never read the book. I need to check that out. That would be cool to read, to see how they did it. I saw the film, and you're right. Visually, it's very created something, its own universe.
Well, I guess the J parent, 2 thumbs up. You heard it here first.
Right, Trisha?
I was gonna say, going back to Neil Gaiman, Neverwhere is another one where the setting of London was just as much a character as the characters. And when we go to London, we wanted to stop through all of that, but that stuck with me as very real. And then honestly, the first thing when I think of setting was the first line of the gunslinger, which is the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. And the imagery used in that series, all of that, all of the whole Dark Tower series was just amazing and real to me, especially when you're going between the different realms, how everything felt. That was probably for me one of my favorite King settings, even though he's got a lot of great like real world settings, but that one, he was able to make these fantastic realms just as real. So those stuck with me for a long time.
I gotta ask you, which one was your favorite in the series? Which was your favorite in the series? Oh, putting her on the spot. I'll tell you, mine was the fourth. That makes you feel any better. The fourth one was where they went kind of back in time and showed Roland's backstory. What about you? I don't know.
I'll answer. Mine was the drawing of the 3.
You did the second book, which was more a New York setting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of it was in New York, yeah. And on a beach with lobster people.
Oh, that's right.
But to be fair, I haven't finished the series. I have not finished the Dark Tower. I know I'm a bad horror fan.
I've only read The Gunslinger, but I've heard so much, and like hearing you guys, that it makes me want to go on because so many people talk about that book.
I just don't want to get to the point where King's a character himself. Like I think that's why I haven't gotten back into it. Like I don't want to get to that part.
He threw himself in Salem's Lot. I was like, man, made me want to read the whole thing. I was like, that was the most intriguing part. I was like, man, I want to see how he deals with himself.
You can watch the movie. It's pretty much the same thing as all, 9 books or whatever there was.
Yeah,
I've heard. I heard it really captured the book.
You actually had an hour and 30 minutes. Really did.
There was no movie. There was just this really cool exchange between Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey that was just great for its own sake and really had nothing to do with anything.
Sorry, I derailed you a little bit there, Lisa.
No. Well, I think we're at the point of, does anyone have anything else they want to share or mention about environments and horror stories?
Once again, just like anything else, I mean, I just make sure, especially if you're doing something real world that you're not familiar with, make sure you're doing your research as best you can. I don't think anybody's going to care if you make a genuine attempt and you get some little details wrong, but just do your best, your due diligence and such. And if you're going to create a world or some setting, you know, like something fantastical like the Dark Tower or Punktown or anything, or, you know, like your version of hell, my advice would really be just go all out, man. Just like don't let yourself be restrained. Just go nuts with it and make it is, I guess, get as fanboyish with it as you like, you know. Because I think when people try to create something fantastical and kind of restrain themselves too much, it just doesn't work as well. It feels kind of chained or watered down. So.
I'm curious. I have a question in the midst of the summary.
Yeah.
For everyone. Do you get more terrified if the place is real and then feels real, or if it's fantastical and you're put into another sort of sphere? Do you really feel
Neither,
fear?
actually. For me, what's more terrifying is the weird things bordering on bizarro, where you don't have a trustworthy, like it's purposely built into not being able to be a trustworthy setting, where it doesn't necessarily follow rules. And it's almost like it becomes an unreliable setting that you've got an unreliable narrator. To me, those are the most terrifying settings in horror because of the built-in lack of rules. And if it's well done, then that's like some of my greatest like nightmare escapes. You can do it poorly by like not specifically making, but when it's well done, that unreliable setting that's could be a real place but isn't, is the most terrifying for me.
I like that concept a lot. I hadn't thought about that before, but that's very unsettling. You know, kind of adjacent to that, what I find kind of scary is those places in fiction where a real world location or a, you know, kind of a mundane setting meets with the fantastical. And, you know, an example I can think of is in like John Langan's The Fisherman. At the point towards the end of the book where they go into this house and there's this whole like other world and this beach with this Leviathan-esque thing out in the water, and you know, walking into this house is just this whole other world. And you know, I guess John Langan was a little bit he didn't know how crazy to take that scene, you know, whether he should kind of rein it in. And I think he said that Laird Barron told him just to go all out with it. And it's just a fantastic melding of the real world and the fantastic. And it's almost dizzying, you know, very effective.
Yeah, I'd say it's all about immersion and atmosphere. We haven't used that big A word that everybody likes to throw around. But if it could be a completely fantastical landscape, if you can make me feel like I'm there and I'm feeling whatever that main character's feeling, and it doesn't matter how unreal it will be because you're making it real to me. So it's really about the author's ability to bring me into their story and their world.
Anyone else have any thoughts to share? Questions to ask? All right. Well, thank you guys all for joining us and talking about this. And I'll put the links to all your books and pages on the bottom of the thing.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yep. Have a great weekend.
Yes. Thanks for hosting this. It's good to see all you guys.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a lonely year.
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
Get easy.